Welcome to Larry the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Opeth and their album BlackWater Park, released in 2001. Not sure what got me thinking about Opeth. They're a band that I was really into, and in fact, the last video that I just made on albums and songs and bands that sort of trigger memories in you. This is one of those instances. Opeth is a band that really takes me back to the early 2000s. Now, I was never somebody that was fully embraced, fully immersed, or fully involved in the extreme metal scene. I've talked about how I drifted away from metal like around 88, 89. I came back around like around 94 or so. And when I started getting back into metal, I started sort of catching up on the stuff that I missed from those bands I was listening to through the 80s, Maiden, Priest, Dio, all that stuff. And around 95, I discovered doom metal, and I kind of went full in on doom metal and rediscovering all the classic bands and the albums that I missed for them. So I missed out on the whole like late 80s birth of death metal, early 90s death metal stuff. I often hear Darren from Sabbath Sunday. He'll talk about how he was reading these magazines and discovering these bands, and how he had kind of drifted away from traditional metal a little bit, but was getting into the more extreme stuff. For me, that didn't really happen. My last stuff was like Anthrax and Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer and stuff like that, and then I just drifted away from it. So when I got back into metal, I dove into doom, and it was probably like then around the late 90s that I started kind of peeking my head into listening a little bit to some of the death metal bands names that I had heard that I just didn't really know much about. I remember getting Obituary, Slowly Rewrought. I got Morbid Angel, Altars of Madness. I got a few death albums, kind of like the early wave of death metal stuff, especially the Florida stuff. I got a couple of those, and I kind of liked it, but I never fully got into it. It just, as somebody who came from the traditional metal world, it was hard for me to, for long periods of time, really get into the growling vocals and sort of the the extreme nature of some of the music. And I never really got into the imagery of a lot of these bands, like Cannibal Corpse, for instance, the horror and the gore and stuff like that. That never appealed to me. I've always been, and explains why I was probably gravitated towards doom metal. I like that kind of imagery: cemeteries, Victorian Gothic architecture, stuff like this, forests with fog-filled forests and stuff like that. So in a lot of ways, Opeth was kind of like a gateway band for me into death metal. When I got into them, it then led me into exploring other things and kind of led to black metal. Then I started sort of getting into black metal. But it's easy to see how they could be a gateway band for somebody like me. Again, they've got the sort of imagery that lines up kind of with doom metal, forests, fog, stuff like that. And Opeth combines a lot of different elements in their sound. To me, they're very atmospheric and moody at times. There's a lot of melodicism too. That's the other thing. I kind of had trouble embracing the death metal stuff I was listening to at the time because it was a little too noisy for me. There wasn't enough melody. There wasn't enough melodicism. But here you're getting, and it was kind of interesting revisiting this album. I haven't really dove back into these records in a very, very long time. And like I said, this really takes me back to the early sort of 2004, 2005. That's when I was really into Opeth. In fact, I saw them I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, and they played in Philadelphia, and I was trying to figure out what the date of this was. I was looking on YouTube for videos, and I saw that they played there in 2001. I think it was 2004 that there was a clip of them playing at the place where I saw them, the Trocadero in Philadelphia. And so that probably makes sense. That's about the time that I was really getting into this. And at the time, For those who may not know, in Philadelphia, there's this area, South Street, which is like a lot of nightclubs, bars, tattoo places, and stuff like that. I think it's changed over the years, but at the time, it was a place everybody drove their cars up and down the street. Friday, Saturday night, it was always really hopping and busy. And Relapse Records used to have a storefront, believe it or not, that just carried extreme metal. It was a small shop. You walked in, I don't even think they had vinyl. I think it was just all CDs. We're talking early 2000s now. And upstairs, you had to go up sort of this narrow, winding stairs. They had a small room upstairs, and they would sometimes do meet and greets up there. And they had a meet and greet with Opeth. So they were playing at the Chocadero. I had a raging fever, and it was like a weeknight too. Had to get I was really sick, but I was like, I've got to go to this show, you know. So I drove down to Philadelphia, which was like over an hour ride for me. Went to the signing that they were doing. There was not that many people there, and in fact, I remember sort of a little funny story about it. I walked up, and I don't remember if the whole band was there. I think there was just maybe two or three of the guys, but I do remember that Michael Akerfeld was there, and I was wearing a Candlemass shirt, and it was in the winter, and I remember I took my jacket off, and I had this Candlemass shirt on, and Michael pointed at me, and he's like, hey, you, or something, you know, and he stood up, and he took his jacket off, he took his sweater off, he took another shirt off, and underneath all that at the very bottom, he had the exact same Candlemass shirt on that I did. So when I got to the table, he was just telling me about how he loved Candlemass, and he was friends with the guys in Candlemass, and all this other stuff. So, but yeah, at that time, I was just really into them, and it makes sense why I would have been into them as I revisited this record, which I haven't listened to in a really long time. There were a couple things that surprised me. The things that I realized, like it's very melodic, and I knew that, remembered that about it, and it's easy to see how I was able to embrace this, whereas I was having trouble with like Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel at that time. I've come to, appreciate, I really love Morbid Angel now, but at the time I couldn't really fully embrace a lot of that stuff. It was too noisy for me. But Opeth, there's a lot of melody in these songs. The soloing, there's really not, there's a little bit of kind of shredding on here, but there's a lot of melody in the soloing. There's, of course, some really heavy parts, but there's not a lot of just like wall of sound, blast beat kind of stuff. In fact, I was just listening to it before I made the video. I don't really remember there being any blast beat type stuff on this. So it's really heavy, but you get these melodic moments in the guitar playing, in the riffing. Of course, Michael, he growls at times, and he also sings clean. And at that time, that was kind of a unique thing, at least to me. Now, I know around this time the Gothenburg stuff was happening, and I'm sure there were other people starting to do this, but this was the first time that I heard it used like this, and it really appealed to me because not only did we get the growling stuff, but there was melody there. There was clean vocals that added some melody to it, and that was really, I think, what drew me in. The atmosphere and moods of some of these songs are almost doomy in some ways. Not in the sense that they're playing slow riffs, but just in the fact that these songs, they create a mood. Whereas a lot of the other death metal stuff I was hearing was just like brutal, and that never really appealed to me. I'm always a guy that enjoys more atmospheric stuff that conjures up feelings and moods and vibes and things like that. And so these songs were doing that for me. And there's a lot of variety on this album too. There's a lot of moments, and this is sort of a signature for them, at least at this time. I'll be honest with you, I don't know every Opeth album. I especially lost track with them maybe after like Damnation and that sort of era. I sort of lost track of them. But there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I'd say this all the time, I love what I call gear changes, when things just suddenly shift. So you're getting growling vocals and all this really intense stuff, and then all of a sudden it drops down and there's like an acoustic guitar thing, and then he comes in with the clean vocal. There's tempo changes, weird riff changes. There's all these super tight, it's very prog-ish at times also. There's these super tight riffs like in the first song, one of my favorites, The Leper Affinity, they go up high, play these lines together and come back, then drop down really low and they're chugging along. And so there's prog-ish elements to it. There's fantastic musicianship all over the album. I mean, Michael and Peter on guitar, Peter Lindgren on guitars, Martin Mendez on bass, Martin Lopez on drums. He has a lot of cool, really like where the band will stop for a second and he'll do like some cool fill, and then they come in on some really tight thing, or it changes gears and there's an acoustic part or a piano part that comes in. There's songs on here that are just really kind of mellow and quiet, or that start off really mellow and quiet, then get really big. There's a lot of long, epic songs on here. I mean, there's three songs at over 10 minutes. So it was really fun revisiting this. Reminded me of how this was a good gateway for me, because it had that melodicism, it had the atmosphere, it had the doomy feel to some of the things. Again, not in that it's playing really slow, heavy riffs, but just in the vibe of the whole thing. I loved the lyrics and the titles and everything. Songs that jumped out for me. I mean, I love the whole record, but songs that really jumped out for me. I mentioned the Leper Affinity, just for those lines and everything, the intricate proggy type lines. The Drapery Falls is awesome. That's a very epic, moody one that moves through a lot of different things. The Funeral Portrait is another one that I really liked, and the title track Blackwater Park is amazing, and that's an epic 12 minutes and 8 seconds. Blackwater Park being a band, like a 70s prog band that Michael's known for being somebody who's really into the 70s proggish type stuff. And now that I go back and re-listen to this as somebody who has dived way deeper into that kind of heavy 70s prog stuff, then certainly, back then when I was first hearing this album, I can really hear it now. I can hear these influences coming through, and that will get more and more as the band goes on. We're basically now they're a straight up prog band. I don't think he growls anymore at all. They've sort of left that behind. But the other thing that came to me as I was listening to it was making me think of Porcupine Tree. And I know that that's an influence on Michael. And when I went to do some research on this, looked it up, Steve Wilson was involved in the production on this. It was produced by Opeth and Steve Wilson. And I can really hear that. I can hear those elements in that influence of Porcupine Tree onto this, again, in those dynamics, things really loud, things getting really quiet. The only thing that was a little disappointing for me was, now I have it on vinyl. I think the vinyl mix is good. The CD that I was listening to, which is the original version of it, I believe it's not like a remastered version, is kind of a victim of the loudness wars. This is when the loudness wars was really amping up, the early mid 2000s, and that's a little disappointing. I enjoyed it better on the vinyl. The vinyl seemed to have a little bit more breathing room to it. Unfortunately, the CD gets a little flattened out and splattered at times, which is disappointing because there's so much dynamics in these songs. A really dynamic mix would have brought that out even more. And I mentioned that in the Porcupine Tree that made my top 10 for 2022. Their latest album is very, very dynamic, and it works to a great effect. So overall, this is just a really, really cool record, man. The epic stuff on here is just flat out epic. They really sort of carved out their own sound. And I'm guessing that there were probably other people that this was a gateway for them also. And I know what got me thinking about this, where I just got done with the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise. I got a video coming from that. I got to edit some things together. There was a band on their Fractal Universe that I just absolutely loved, and it made me think of Opeth. They're a progressive death metal band from France, I believe. But it really reminded me of this era of Opeth. And when I came back from the cruise, I sort of had Opeth on my mind, and I busted this one out and just really loved it. And I think I'm going to go back now and be digging more into Opeth's catalog. So, all right, there you go. Just a really awesome album, kind of a turning point album. As I was reading Wikipedia, it even said that, I don't know, one of these magazines, listed as like the greatest like progressive death metal album of all time. And I can believe that, because there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of amazing playing, amazing songs. It just really takes you on a journey. So just a really awesome album. Okay, so let me know, you guys out there, do you guys What do you guys think of Blackwater Park by Opeth? I know I have a lot of Porcupine Tree fans out there. People mention Porcupine Tree, so are you guys also a fan of this? Let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.